everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. Man, woo! Are you enjoying this spring? You know, it is a balmy 82 degrees today here in Billings, Montana. We probably will get snow next week, but you know what? That's what spring does in Montana. And we literally have been so dry this winter. I can't believe how the weather is changing. Well, yeah, I can. Yeah, I totally can. I've been looking at this since 2017, ahead in our weather patterns. However, we have got one heck of a wild weather pattern coming up in this summer. Lots of tornadoes for Montana and the Midwest. So watch out for those tornadoes as I look ahead in our psychic weather vision. Our psychic weather vision today predicts lots of tornadoes and golf ball size hail throughout June, July, and the first part of August, more so the August part in the middle part of the country. And I don't think you need to be a psychic to probably figure that one out. However, we are going to have some weird tornadoes in Florida. I'm seeing weird tornadoes in New York State because of inverted hot, bizarre weather pattern thingies that are water spouts, all kinds of stuff. Weird weather moving more northerly on the East Coast. And this is our new normal. You know, weird weather is going to be our new normal. So really, 82 degrees in the spring in Montana is actually pretty normal. And so is snowing in another week. That's just what it does here. It kind of flings and flips and flops and then decides it's May. Okay, yay, let's mellow out. So gang, as we go through all of these big changes and all of these sweeping wide changes in the earth, and a lot of people are going through personal changes, I've been getting a lot of email from people wondering what to do with some of the big, heavy emotional stuff that's been coming up for them. You know, we did have that Scorpio moon a bit ago, and we're just getting our head on straight about what this means for us. And one of the things that I am so intrigued about in this time frame is dealing with the shadow self. And I really don't talk about that a whole lot because there are so many great practitioners who have been talking about the shadow self for 40 and 50 years. You know, there's spiritual teachers who've been talking about the shadow self for 2,000 years. So we've got a lot of experience here. You know, if you listen to the Buddhas talk about it, or Jesus, or really, you know, Mohammed, there's a lot of people that talk about the shadow self. However, from a modern 2021 perspective of what might have coughed out of the bottle for people throughout this last 4-year period of what I like to call the experiment with rage culture. I don't know about you, but that wasn't for me. I didn't enjoy that all that much. However, we might have found some interesting components of the shadow self that might have wormed out of you during that time frame. And so we're just going to go ahead and start here. And I've got this wonderful angel here that's going to help me define the shadow self also. I'm certainly not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a mental health professional. Yet when we're talking about the shadow self, we're talking about what we like to call as humans in ourself, you know, our dark side, or the side we don't like to show people, or we're afraid if the shadow self gets out there and people don't see that we're perfect, that we will be cast aside and we'll have to beg our way back in and all these terrible things. Well, obviously, we're all human and we all have pieces of ourselves that are intolerant and can be angered, and our hormones can get wacky, and men's hormones can get wacky too, by the way. You know, whereas women can go through wild estrogen swings, men can go through wild testosterone swings and just get insane and rageful and blah. So, you know, everybody is a big bag of chemistry if you're a human being. So there's a lot that goes on, and we might have had difficult upbringings. We may have had abusive marriages, whatever the deal is. The shadow self exists within us. And in the early phases of metaphysics, when all the metaphysicals were gathering at the shores of metaphysicality, there was a real popular, weird, I'd say almost religious adherence to what I would call a 1950s ideology of being the shiny person. if you're going to manifest good things in your life, you can't ever have a bad thought. Because if you have a bad, naughty thought, you'll usher in naughty things to your life. Everything bad that happens to you is because of your naughty thoughts. Mad and naughty. It's all your fault. Ting! And this little glint comes off of a really scary veneer smile there, okay? So, and I was never really a fan of that because although we can manifest garbage to us, if all we are is a garbage manifester, guess what? Like attracts like. So, hey, there you go. That is a thing. The other thing is that oftentimes some of our biggest lessons that we're learning are because we are encountering chaotic and wild card situations and we have a choice in how we're going to behave. And so, again, this ruffles the feathers of quite a few people that in my own field, especially folks who consider themselves intercessors of angels. And a lot of those folks take on this very, I guess, sort of what they deem as sort of a holy way of being, okay? It's not a criticism, it is an observation where these folks they'll wear a lot of white flowy robes and they'll talk in this very soft voice about what the angels want you to know today is that everyone is loved. And that very well could be the message they're getting from those angels. And I always say, why don't I get to talk to those angels? Hi, Danielle. I just want you to know that you're really cool and we really love you. And you know, if we had an edible, we'd share it with you right now because we just want you to feel the chill of God, baby. Hello? What am I doing wrong to get the angels that are like, hello, the following is going to happen on your timelines. Let the mud monkeys know. I'm like, wow, okay, I've obviously got something wrong with my angel antenna here. But anyway, I digress. So the shadow self will respond in crises. And the shadow self is made up of our own negative experiences, our hurtful experiences, our fear experiences. It's made up of our life path experiences. It's made up of our fears. A lot of the shadow self are projections of our fears that we keep rolling in an internal movie house that shows, our greatest horror features over and over again, and our internal self, our shadow self, watches these horror films, which are totally fictitious, by the way. Like, you probably got a few in your archive. Do you have the horror film, I'm going to run out of money and die eating cat food by the time I'm 60? Do you have that horror film? Okay, that's one that I know plays in the American psyche quite often. How about this horror film? I just know my spouse is cheating on me because I've gained 5 pounds. Right? Do you love that horror film? And in that horror film, you star as a person who looks exactly the same, but for some reason, even though your spouse is treating you exactly the same, you are sure that there's some secret affair going on. Yeah, I've had that horror film run a time or two myself. What about this one? What about the horror film called Everybody Hates Me? How about that one, right? Where you star in the starring role where you're just going about your daily life with your friends, and because somebody doesn't text you back fast enough, all of a sudden the camera zooms in and lightning and thunder crashes and you start hearing the psycho thing, wink, 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 wink in the background, and all of a sudden you're sure that everybody hates you. We watch these horror films in the shadow self theater 24/7. And then our shadow self runs over to our shiny self. I don't know what to call the regular self. We'll call it the shiny self. The shadow self runs to the shiny self and says, everybody hates you. You know that, right? That's why they didn't text you back. And the shiny self is actually on the phone with another friend. And the shiny self is like, what are you talking about? I'm on the phone with Jane right now, and we're having a great conversation. Yeah, but she didn't text you back last week, so there's probably something she's hiding from you. I mean, our shadow selves, it's almost like they have a job to become the most paranoid, neurotic, fictitious, really controversial horror maker to ever live in our psyche. That's their job. And then their job is to run that by our shiny self and see if we buy into it. Our shadow selves sit in our own bomb shelters where we stuck some beans in 1980 because we were sure that the Russians were going to bomb us back then. And our shadow self sits down there on our own ham radio and comes up with all these conspiracies and wires it up to the shiny self and says, "Are you getting this? I've been watching this for a while. I think we're being blah, blah, blah. We're being manipulated. We're being ignored, blah." So if you consider that the shadow self is just really doing its job to provide us with every single worst case scenario known to humanity, aliens, elementals, interdimensionals, and beyond, then it's a lot easier to get along with the shadow self because we're like, "Oh, you're just John Carpenter. Oh, I get it. You're Ridley Scott. Ah, right. You're Stephen King. My bad. Here this whole time, I thought I was neurotic because I had this really dark conspiratist character down there, Stanley Kubrick, making up movies of my life that don't exist and trying to convince me they're real, and then asking me to treat the outside world according to the fictitious horror movies that are playing in Shadow Self Theater 24/7. And I find this so interesting because we tend to be so hard on ourselves about the shadow self, just so hard. And we tend to believe that the shiny selves are the selves to strive for. Well, really, when I talk to these angels about our nature as humans, we are like a pendulum. We are chemical beings. We swing from one side to the other side. We process through good and negative. We process through happy and sad. And if we can just experience these emotions without feeling like we have to take ourselves to shame centers are us, to hang ourselves out on a flagpole of flatulation as we just sit there and beat ourselves into the ground, talking about how I'm not the happy person on the metaphysical self-help guidebook thing. I'm having this intersection in my brain of every self-help group, of every self-help book, of every self-help seminar and workshop, which there is a place for all of that. And I bless all of it. And it's all been part of our learning path as being humans. Yet, man, I have a problem with this idea that if we ever have a bad mood or a cranky day, or we think for some reason we're listening to the shadow self theater and we really do believe that we're just a bucket of poo that nobody loves, or whatever experience it is that we're having that day with our shadow, we judge it. And one of the things that I think is so hardcore is when we are judging the self like this, we don't take the time to learn from that shadow. We're so busy judging that shadow and making fun of it because it lives in a bomb shelter in our darkest basement that we don't understand that it's an important teacher for us. And it also handles a lot of our emotional processing that through our religious culture, because remember, Jesus loves shiny, happy girls and just and valiant boys. So we've had this weird, you can't be human, you have to be perfect, you have to never let anybody down, kind of grotesque caricature of ourselves thrust upon us, much of it through religion, and especially this smile, you're prettier if you smile. Can't you just smile and giggle and bite your fingernail, ladies? Ew. That will develop a homicidal shadow self that will come out and just pour liquid nicotine in somebody's coffee to stop their heart. That's just bad. So, see, that's my shadow self theater talking right there. I think sometimes it is a good idea to acknowledge that our shadow self is the portion of us that deals with the range of our emotions, and it makes it okay to deal with them inside of ourselves. Now, if we act out on all of our shadow self issues, then we become Ted Bundy, and that gets super awkward for yourself and others. So perhaps keep that in check. Yet, if one of the things that you can look at is the shadow self as a teacher and a manager of maybe moods that are harder for the shiny self to deal with, then we can maybe give the shadow self a break. Sometimes the shadow self just needs a day to itself to decompress and be around nobody, and just to feel all its feelings that it's been collecting for you this entire time. and just to shut out the world, and you just crawl into your blanket and wish that, somebody would put dirt on you and you could just hide in the ground and the world would go away for a day. Maybe you and a 6-pack of beer and your shadow self crawl into a self-evaluative hole all day long. Or maybe it's tea, or maybe it's a book, or maybe you call a friend and you're like, oh my Lord, I'm a troll. I'm a troll today. I'm a homicidal troll. And your friend's like, it's okay, me too. I think it's an astrological alignment. It's normal to have these feelings, okay? It's normal. I speak to angels all the time. And again, as I was pointing out at the top of the podcast, apparently I'm not on the right angel or the correct angel frequency because I'm not getting these, hey, Danielle, the earth is so amazing and you're so amazing and everybody is so amazing. Would you like a halo edible? I'm not getting those angels. I'm getting these angels saying, yes, you are definitely amazing. And you have some choices to make. And you can either rise in amazing or you can just sink in unhappy, and both are great because you're learning. I'm thinking, oh, I want the halo edible angel gang. God. But it's normal for us to feel a range of emotions and to feel and to think dark things sometimes. I mean, I know that I had a lot of clients who called me up over the last 4 years who were just in tears, thinking that they had lost their minds and confessing, literally like a confessional, these deep, dark feelings that they had, and were thinking terrible, harmful, self-harming thoughts and murderous thoughts of public figures that were causing duress for people on a global level. And I had these folks just bawling, saying, what's wrong with me? I've never wanted to actually, learn how to shoot a gun and kill somebody in my whole life. Something's wrong with me. And when our psyches are overloaded, the shadow self starts running worst case scenarios. It starts running what I call backdoor scenarios. Now, I had a lot of folks calling up saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I would actually do harm to someone who's a public figure. I've lost it. I need to turn myself in for my bad thoughts. And I would have to remind people that just because those are thoughts doesn't mean they're actions. And if you actually want to turn yourself in for having those kind of thoughts, you're probably not the kind of person who's going to go pull a trigger. So the reason we have those thoughts, gang, is because when the psyche is overwhelmed, let's just say, I would really love to become the world's greatest secret sniper on a Tom Clancy movie. And there are these individuals that I feel in the world are hurting many, many people. And boy, I wish I could just sneak in there. And if that one person wasn't in the world and I was a sniper and, that person would just go away and all the problems would go away. And isn't it nice when our shadow self goes to such an easy solution, right? Which is not an easy solution. And oftentimes high profile people who cause problems for others, if that were to happen to that person, they would be martyred. And their cause would go on 150,000 times stronger than the original poop starter started it out as. So, eliminating people we disagree with, not a very good idea. Yet the shadow self will run that scenario. And I literally had thousands of phone calls like that, and letters, and emails, and texts from 2016 to 2020. Because people thought they were losing it. And it's important to note that our shadow self will process what, again, I call backdoor scenarios, so that our psyche or our mind has what it thinks as, it's a way out of a terrible situation. Now, that doesn't mean anybody's going to go out and do something terrible and buy a gun and shoot someone. Yet, to allow the brain to go to that place, it's a way that the mind can terminate the living nightmare. That doesn't mean a person is actually going to run out and terminate a human being. As a matter of fact, most people that want to terminate human beings very rarely talk about it. Some of these very disturbed shooters will mention it occasionally, but, people who have a very specific person that they wish would drop dead because they see this person hurting many people in a large scale format across the world, generally those folks, especially if they're having guilt about having those feelings, they're not going to go do something like that. The reason our shadow self goes there is because we feel out of control. If we could pretend in some other world that it was just so easy to have that person blinked out of existence by one crazy sniper shot. If we can pretend that that would take care of the problems, if our shadow self can run that horror movie where we turn into the psychotic hero, but that also gets shot in the end because, what you did is heinously illegal in the movie, then the brain, the psyche, the emotions have somewhere to terminate what that psyche feels is causing the horror. No, I'm not suggesting that we all need to have murder fantasies, okay? We have enough shooter problems in this country. Yet I'm bringing this up because it was such a prevalent problem that people were experiencing. And I had a lot of people's angels standing by when folks would just be in tears going, I'm going to go to hell for thinking these things. Well, let me tell you, no rightful person, a person rightful in their mind and in their heart, wants to stand around and watch a person ruin the world. That's just not really what nice people want to have happen in their universe, okay? So they can be those, boy, if that person just blinked out of existence fantasies, that would sure make it easier. That is part of the shadow self trying to help you cope with feeling out of control because the shiny self can't make any sense out of it. The shiny self is looking at this very harmful, this Adolf Hitler person and saying, ooh, wow, you shouldn't put people in gas chambers. Wow, you shouldn't round people up like that. Boy, if that one person wasn't pushing this big fat agenda and inciting people to violence, maybe things would be different. Because the shiny person doesn't know how to deal with that. The shiny part of our psyche is looking at this going, whoa, man. And that's when we also, the shadow self is encompassed also by a lot of our ancient DNA. You got to remember, folks, we evolved from apes. We evolved from primates. And primates, if there's too many of them smashed into one area, get very territorial. And they go a little crazy on each other. And they'll pick up stones and bash each other's heads in a group. I mean, chimpanzees can be freaky. There's a shadow self horror movie for you. Someday you're going to be trapped in a room full of chimpanzees that really resent you for having more opposable thumbs than them, and they're going to beat you in the head with a rock. There you go. Shadow self theater right there. So, we think about this dark, weird stuff, and we're like, what is happening in my head? But if we think about primates, they just act out on those impulses. They beat a chimpanzee literally into a pulp. There's all kinds of weird research on mob violence with primates. And, packs can go crazy like a wolf pack or a dog pack. But there's a real specific approach pattern to primate mob mentality. And there's usually, rather than like an alpha that's just getting everybody whooped up, there's usually a recruitment that goes on within the primate group of the cray-cray chimpanzee. And it's like it's recruiting gang members, and then they have a little aside chat, and then they all go beat on another one. Where, wolves, it kind of falls in. They kind of go into just this automatic pack hierarchy, which is a little bit different. So you got to remember that this is a big part of our genome. And when primates get really, really frightened, they just literally attack. And once in a while, you'll see a primate that hides, but usually they're babies. It's the ones that have gotten older. They'll come out swinging hardcore if they feel attacked. And that's the fight or flight instinct. And human beings will do the same thing. So we've got this, what they call the monkey brain. And it's the very, very back part of the brain. It's at the base of the brain stem down there. And it's the amygdala, the fight or flight area. And they call it the monkey brain because it acts on that instinct. If I'm pushed too far, I'm going to beat your head in with a rock, or I'm going to freeze. But really, a lot more people than you would think, when they're really pushed to protect others, have a fight instinct. When they are pushed to protect themselves, have a freeze instinct. And a lot of women have a freeze instinct because we're taught not to hurt people's feelings. We're taught not to hurt or make anybody mad. Or if we make a person mad, they might hurt us worse. And sometimes the best option you have is just to play dead. I get that. Yet women are notorious for having a freeze instinct because we have been taught for thousands of years to shut up, to not fight back, because that could hurt us worse in the long run. And, just as an aside, I think our shadow self is good to have online, especially for young women in the 21st century. My niece up in Bozeman, Montana, was in the grocery store. And she had this really weird lady. My niece is in her early 20s, and she's just a hottie patati, very physically fit, loves fitness. And this woman in her 30s came up and was just weird and was like trying to, hey, what's going on? Trying to start this really awkward, strange conversation with her over and over again. And my niece, was polite, but kind of was like, you're a weirdo, and would walk away. And the whole time, and then this lady would approach her again in the next aisle and, oh boy, look at this cereal's 25% off. Hey, do you know anything about this town? And blah. And the whole time this is going on, there's this man who's standing there watching them both. And to cut to the chase of the story, my niece basically just kind of ignored this lady and walked off in mid-sentence and kind of was like, you're a weirdo, and just left. And was so disturbed by how bizarre this was because this man was just waiting for something to happen. It was obvious that the woman was working with the man. And when you see a lot of human trafficking issues, these guys will send women in to try to hook these young girls because women will trust women more than they will trust a male that comes up and talks to them. So my niece went and talked to her roommate, whose father is a policeman, and she called her dad, and the policeman got back a hold of my niece and said, that's absolutely a trafficking scenario, and you need to make a report because we might be looking for those people. So my niece made a report. Now, had my niece not listened to her shadow self, which was like, oh my God, these are creepy traffickers. You need to get the hell out of there. Don't be nice. Don't smile. Don't be the shiny girl trying to not hurt everybody's feeling. Oh, okay, I feel really awkward about, you just invited me outside to see something in your car and I really don't want to go, but I don't want to hurt your feelings. So I'll just be the conditioned girl that goes out to the freaking creepy van, gets whacked on the head, and gets trafficked. It was because of her shadow self that she was protected. She had that instinct of something ain't right here, and she listened. And of course, I'm sure her guardian angels were working overtime. Yet our shadow self is there to protect us as well if we will listen to it and not feel guilty, especially ladies. Don't feel guilty about just saying, excuse me, and just excusing yourself and walking off. We are seeing an unprecedented level of human trafficking in the United States on native reservations, in small towns. Here in Montana, we have a horrible human trafficking problem because we have so many outdoor spaces where there's nobody. I mean, you can disappear a person really easily in Montana. And so it's important that our shadow self is not condemned. I mean, we don't have to lead with our shadow self all the time. We don't have to act like an asshat and be rude and be nasty and turn into a paranoid person who eventually ends up shooting a grocery store to pieces. I mean, we don't need to fall apart like that. But if we listen to our shadow self, it is there to protect us. And it's a built-in mechanism to evaluate danger. And the shadow self also not only can help us out, yet it can be a companion when we need to talk about just really ugly, snotty things in ourself. And our shadow self sometimes is the one that'll come forward and say, man, why do you even want to be on this planet? Why do you even want to be here? It's so much easier to be somewhere else. And the shiny self is like, shut up. I'm already having enough of a difficult time trying to stay on this planet. And, I think this is an interesting point to cover here. This angel's kind of going there, so I'm following this angel. I think this is an interesting point to cover because, again, obviously I don't have the have a happy gummy angel. I got the angel talking about taking one's life over here. What we've got is a culture of folks trying to live in the shiny person all the time, trying to shame themselves for their shadow side, trying to act like their shadow is something to be ashamed of just because they have a negative thought once in a while. And a lot of our religious and metaphysical culture has really driven a nail in that coffin of self-judgment. Let a smile be on your umbrella or you're going to attract an energetic rainstorm. It's your own fault if your whole entire life is taken out by a bad mood tornado. I mean, there's a difference between being in a bad mood and being a drama person and absorbing that all the time and allowing your shadow self to converse with you about real feelings that you have. I think you would be really, really Well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, gang. I don't think anybody who listens to this podcast would necessarily be surprised by this particular piece of information. Yet, a lot of the calls that I get from people to translate messages on their life path from the angels, a lot of people, probably over 70% of people, are either fighting with taking their life and not being here anymore, or have sincerely, very seriously thought about it. And even some of the happiest people I've ever gotten a chance, like legitimately just bone happy people that I've gotten an opportunity to translate for and to read for, have expressed, oh yeah, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to kill myself because I couldn't figure out how to make my bills to pay, and I just couldn't figure out how to operate in this world. And, if we've got this sociopathic society that makes us want to off ourselves because we can't figure out how to live in it, it's actually easier just to work to change the society than to just cut your timeline short. And there are many people who would disagree with that and saying, well, you can't change the society, so it's easier to cut my timeline short. And that's the shadow self will argue that point. Yet, I think it's important to bring up that many of us have had thoughts about wanting to leave the planet. I have. I've had those thoughts. You want to call them suicidal thoughts? I've had them before. I've sat there and looked ahead on timelines and looked at my life choices, years and years and years ago, and thought to myself, wow, sister, you have effed this up. And you just look ahead in the future and see a lot of trauma and a lot of duress. And why the hell would you even want to stay here? You can pull this ripcord right now and go. And I felt the sadness of the world on so many occasions. I mean, and that'll just drown you in a bummer pretty quickly. So did I do it? Well, clearly not. Here I am. Yet I had conversations with my shadow self about it. I wrote songs about people who chose to do that. And I do have a bit of a dark sense of humor sometimes, so I hope I'm not offending anybody here, because suicide is a very real problem, especially in our young person community, in the LGBTQI community, in our older people community. Suicide's a horrible problem. So I'm not making light of this horrible problem. I'm simply speaking from my own experience. When I felt very overwhelmed years and years ago and just was in a rough patch and just could not figure out why the hell I was on the earth, why I felt everything, why I was supposed to be here. What good was it going to do if I saw some pretty gnarly things unfolding, but I couldn't stop them, but I got to watch them happen? That's fun. So I would sit there and think, God, I just really can't take this, And then I was in a space in my life where I was lonely. I was having career changes. I was at the bottom of my life in terms of feeling like I was surrounded by people who didn't understand me, because I really kind of was at that time in my life. It was toward the very, very end of my music career. And, you've been a person your whole life and all of a sudden you're not there anymore. And who the hell are you? I mean, this is years and years ago. It was 20 years ago. But still, that's where I was at, And so my shadow self and I would have these conversations about, well, if you were going to off yourself, sister, how would you do it? And you go through these conversations and the mechanics of it. And no, that's gross. No, that's messy. Ew, no. Ew, God, no. What if somebody finds you like that? No. And then all of a sudden you start thinking about your mom, and then you think about your friends, and then you think about, oh my gosh, this is a really, really permanent, very permanent it's not a solution, but it's a permanent movement towards a solution to a temporary weather storm in your head. And, just by communicating with your shadow self will give you every raunchy, terrible thing you possibly could do to yourself. And pretty soon the shiny self is like, wow, man, that's heavy. And the shadow self's like, yeah, it's really heavy. Are you really sure you want to do all that? And the shiny self's like, not really. Do you want to? And the shadow self's like, well, I am the shadow self, so I am a little dark anyway. But, really, I do think that's a little much. But I'm really glad we had this talk, because I've got all these feelings in here to talk to you about. And again, if you are someone who is struggling with taking your life, I would encourage you to reach out and to speak with someone, because you're not alone. You're not a freak. You're not a weirdo. Many of us, I would like to, maybe there are some people out there who have never once thought about taking their own life because their pain was so great. Yet I've never met that person. So if you're somebody listening today, understand that I've been there. And man, I wanted to off myself so bad at a certain time in my life because the pain of being me was so great. And I had not yet developed a kindness towards myself for that. And I'm not trying to play a martyr. I'm just being honest, gang, because this is the shadow self, this is the episode. So it doesn't mean that I had something super mentally wrong with me. It doesn't mean that I was broken. It meant that I felt that I did not have the strength to stand up underneath the weight of what I felt the pain was in my life. And I was also pretty isolated. The funny thing about celebrity is it isolates you. It isolates you like mad. And I can tell you that if you're someone who is struggling with feelings of being, gone and not wanting to stay here, that I would really, really encourage you to just connect with somebody. It's okay that you feel those things. You're not a freak. You're not mentally going over the edge. There's been a lot going on in the world. Many good people have been pushed into a very dark place of hopelessness. And then COVID separated all of us. And then when I was making the celebrity illusion, when you're a celebrity, you are isolated from people because there's a lot of odd people that will do you harm if they get too in your proximity. But then you've got really weird people who are next to you and close to you who are supposed to be working for you or protecting you, but they're doing you harm. So you're in this weird insulated bubble of hell, and you made yourself be there. So I just want you to hear me that if you're somebody who's been struggling with very dark thoughts, just reach out to a bestie. And if you feel like you don't have a bestie, for God's sakes, go on Facebook and say, gang, I'm struggling with staying on the planet. Raise your hand if you are too, and what are you doing about it? You will hear from hundreds of people that will say, my God, you are valuable. Please don't do that. I was just going through that. You're not alone. I know, right? These times suck. And you will hear from others whose shadow selves will reach out to your shadow self. And then your shadow self won't feel alone. So, there's so many crisis numbers we can call to. There's so many intervention and crisis numbers that we can call if you're feeling like your shadow self is getting the best of you and you really can't stay here. In fact, one of the most prevalent that I have been made known to as far as people saying, oh my gosh, this really, really helped me just to talk to somebody. I didn't even know this person. So I could spew my guts out to them about why I felt like a failure. And my shadow self just got to talk and talk and talk and talk. There is a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It is 24 hours a day, and they speak English and Spanish. And that number is 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. And folks can honestly, there'll be somebody to listen to you. There'll be somebody to reach out to. So even if you don't feel like you want to talk to your family about it, maybe you don't want to freak anybody out, call an empath. A lot of those folks who volunteer on those suicide prevention hotlines are massive empaths. They've been there before and they get it. So this is all part of the shadow self not being shamed. To be able to call somebody, and I'm using, obviously, suicide is a pretty big issue. And we've had a lot of young people leave the planet because, especially in the United States right now, our sociopathic consumerist country does not care if you can't pay your bills. It'll take everything you've got. It'll throw you on the street. Then it will walk by you and ignore you while you're on the street. I mean, that's a pretty rough world, right? So our shadow self reaches into us to talk to us about our deepest fears and our deepest areas of terror. And it's the shadow self also that will do things like, again, think about taking one's life or taking another person's life. Or sometimes the shadow self it's an intense creator. And that's how the shadow self exercises itself. When I was going through some pretty tough times, again, when my world was changing and I did not have a solid group of people around me, my family was far away, I kind of bought into some of my own BS to a degree, so I was pretty miserable. I had to unlearn some really negative patterning and some very negative things that I had learned to cope with the entertainment industry through. So during that time period, I wrote some great music though, but whoa, was it dark. Good Lord. And again, there were characters in these songs that were killing themselves by running in front of trains, or there were characters in these songs that were so alone that the allegory for loneliness ended up being poetically gorgeous, and the music was gorgeous. Yet at the same time, I had this one album, Red Lodge, which had a lot of really heavy, dark songs on it, that I thought, wow, man, in 2008, you were really sucking wind, chicken. That was not, whoa, nothing like a musical diary to remind you just how much your shadow self had access to a recording studio. But these are things that, we're human and we go through these feelings, and I got them out and I was able to healthily process how I felt. I gave my shadow a voice, and there's a fantastic band that I just stumbled upon yesterday. I believe it's called Wookie Foot, which is funny. And they have this lyric, which was, no matter how fast you run, your shadow follows you. And that's true. You can avoid and avoid and avoid. You can go into denial. You can go into, nope, not me. I'm just going to push forward and persevere. Nope, nothing to see here. And your shadow self, your shadow will run just as fast as you are. It'll always be there. We try to outrun our shadow with drugs and alcohol, with sex addictions, with buying a bunch of crap for 5 minutes to drive up our serotonin, because, in America, boy, do we hate to feel bad, don't we? And I'll tell you what, in America, we'll sell you 200 things to make you feel better, starting with a big case of Busch beer and working on down. So, though we all need to reflect on occasion, though we all need to visit with our shadow self periodically, because that's kind of a healthy thing. Suppressing the shadow self makes people snap, and that's where we get our shooters and all kinds of other things. Yet, at least having the opportunity to give the shadow self a voice, it will tell us where we are out of balance. Oftentimes, the shadow self will pop up in response to our shiny self, letting ourself get abused and pushed around. And shadow self is back there going, hey, excuse me, you're letting yourself get treated like crap. And ergo, I'm getting treated like crap, and I'm already dark to begin with, so you really don't want to piss me off, okay? Because this is just going to go psycho sideways. And the shiny self is up front going, shut up, we're trying to be nice. We're trying to get out of this by playing possum and being nice. And shadow self is back there saying, will you let me speak up, please? And shiny self is saying, no, you're rude. You can't talk online. You can't talk to people, because if I let you talk, then I have to clean up after you. And you're not the one that's living out here. I am. And shadow self says, yeah, I know that, because I am drowning in your denial shiny crap back here. And we fight with ourselves, and we fight with ourselves. So this angel is just indicating that if we can have an opportunity to really just listen sometimes when our shadow self is trying to whisper, hey, use these words and defend yourself with a boundary. Defend yourself by walking away. Just get out of this situation. Listen to your shadow self. We all get grumpy and cranky. We all do. And especially if you're in a job that uses a ton of people energy. And when I find myself getting into a cranky pants kind of place, I will go sit in a bathtub and I will just let my shadow self say, you need to unplug, girlfriend. You are becoming one ragged individual here. And I've learned over time that just being able to sit in the bathtub and cry sometimes, just cry. Give your shadow an opportunity to express itself. Then, hey, you feel great for the next 3 weeks because you let the air out of that tire that was going to pop or explode. And it is a fallacy, gang, that we're always supposed to be happy. And if we're not happy, we're not manifesting correctly, or we're not attaching ourselves to spirit correctly. What a crock of controlling, gaslighting, steaming, stinky, gooey horse crap. That's not even true. I mean, we're not built like that as human beings. If it was against our nature to feel sadness, to feel down, to have to process some of our own deepest fears and wounds, If it were against our nature to do these things, then it wouldn't be built into our hormonal chemistry. It would not be built into our thought process. It would not be built into our primate DNA. We've got to wring out the wash rag once in a while. And being sad is not a shadow, but we think of it as a shadow. Being sad is your shiny self saying, oh, I just can't carry this anymore. And then we shove it over to the shadow to handle it. And the shadow's like, why is this my jurisdiction? I'm the really creepy goth person planning people's deaths. What did you go cry, shiny self? Gah! Don't bother me with that drivel. So, our shadow wants us to feel okay in feeling. And how weird is it that our shiny self shoved the jurisdiction of feelings over to the shadow? That's strange, right? Our poor shiny self needs therapy, man. I want to drag shiny self in and have her sit down and she'll be just, shaking like a Pomeranian or a Chihuahua, just shake with this really creepy smile on her face, her teeth chattering like a jack-o'-lantern over there. I'm okay. No, I'm really okay. I'm okay. God, neuroses. Balance, the balance between the shiny and the shadow, that balance, both of those beings are us. We've got the outgoing us, we've got the reclusive us, we've got the angry us, we've got the happy us. They're all you. And these angels are saying they're all righteously placed. Did you ever think your shadow self was righteously placed? My shadow's personally laughing at that right now. And her little goth makeup and her black dyed hair and her black eyeliner and her black hoodie, she's laughing. She's like, oh yeah, I'm righteously placed. Righteous this, sister, The shadow is part of us. And again, gang, there is a big difference here. And I hope that as you listen to this podcast, you're understanding that what these angels are talking about is embracing the wholeness of who you are. And not shaming yourself into a corner because you're not falling under this very fictitious version of being perfect. Yeah, I definitely am a massive, massive believer in thinking before you let your trap fly. Think about your words before they come out your dang mouth. Because words have weight. They have spiritual weight. They have physical weight. They can cut into people and never come out. They're not a weapon, but they are used as the most acute weapon ever. Words are here to let people know how you feel, to communicate ideas, and we have turned them into the death corkscrew when our shadow gets a hold of them and feels threatened. So understand that your words, the words that you speak to yourself, will crucify you worse than the words that someone else will speak to you. We got to keep our shadows listened to and honored. Yeah, we got to keep them in check too. And sometimes we got to back those shadows down and say, look, enough out of you. Enough out of you, Wednesday Addams. Go back to your bomb shelter and go tweak that toilet paper roll into something terrifying that could explode a doorknob off in a zombie apocalypse. But just get out of here. Go do something. Because there is a delicate balance in honoring all the parts of ourself. If we go out of balance and we let the shadow run things, that's when things really go off the rails. And our shadow will seek its voice if we suppress it all the time. If we listen to it periodically, there will be balance there. And that's what this angel is saying, is that everything is divinely appointed in all of us. And we need these reflective shadow moments. And sometimes the shadow moments are really quiet. Sometimes they're not the psychotic Wednesday Addams building a bomb in your bomb shelter. God, I'm really sounding like a psycho here. This is hilarious. I'm just saying, sometimes our shadow just needs a quiet minute by itself. It needs to not entertain the masses. It needs not to fix the world's problems. It just needs a rest. And it needs to feel its disappointment in maybe life choices it's made. Or maybe it needs to be really honest with itself about a dynamic in a relationship that's just not working out. And the shadow is feeling the pain of that because the shiny one is in denial and doesn't want to deal with anything. So it just keeps burying it. But the shadow is trying to get us to look at the truth of something. And we can do that with respect. And we can do it with deliberation. And that's why I was saying earlier, watch your words. If you feel a rush of anger come on, that gives you a boost of adrenaline that makes you feel invincible like a fire hose in that moment. There are times when you need that kind of anger to get you out of a deeply terrifying situation. So do hear me that, man, if your back is against the wall and that anger comes up, fire hose, go for it. But I'm talking about when you feel that arise in you with a loved one that you're arguing with. Keep in mind that our loved ones are not our adversaries. And if someone is trying to be an adversary of yours, they are not a loved one. They don't love you. If they want to be your adversary, if they want to put you through hell, that may be something, but that's not love. All right. So if you're in a loving relationship with somebody and your patience is wearing thin and your shadow is like, hey, I got 19 bombs built down here. You want one? They're word bombs. I got 6 of them. Why don't I just go up and light them on fire? And you're so mad that you've lost control of your ability to choose your words. Oh my God, please walk away. Walk away. And again, I'm not talking about a deadly situation where just somebody's after you and they're gonna get you. You just unload everything you got. And I always say this is a Montana thing. And it goes like this. If you are stupid enough to go around a snake that's bit you once, twice, you get what you get. Or another one is, if you're stupid enough, and don't you love stupid, but this is the shadow side exercise here. This Montana's saying, well, if you're stupid enough to wander in and poke something with the stick that you can't kill, you get what you get. That old saying, never wound anything you can't kill. So our words can wound to a way that you just can't fix it. You can't go back. Word wounds when we're in our shadow self, when we let those things fly because we've let our shadow build up too much and it explodes like a psychotic geyser full of glass shards. When we allow that to happen, you know why we allow that to happen sometimes? Because sometimes our shiny self is too afraid to find its voice. And if we can just get mad enough, then it'll push us past caring what we say, and then we'll get to say everything we mean. Except now we're out of control of the fire hose, and now we're just shredding the person in front of us. And that no longer is about protecting yourself or representing your ideals or being heard. That's about destroying and disabling another human being. Because we feel destroyed and disabled. And we've all been there and we've all done it. Unless you're Mother Teresa. Maybe Mother Teresa did it. Maybe she was the worst dragon. Maybe Mother Teresa had a forked tongue from hell. An awful dragon word hit that she just took off on somebody and that person threw themselves off a cliff in Italy. And Mother Teresa said, oh my God, I've got to use my powers for good and became a nun. Who knows? I don't think that happened. However, we just don't know what Mother Teresa's shadow self was dealing with because she chose to channel it and she chose to use it to understand those who suffered. Our shadow self is an incredible translator. Now my shadow, after creating that image of Mother Teresa, now I can't get, she's in this. She's wearing this 1960s James Bond Chinese-styled assassin outfit with hair sticks and nunchucks, and she's the dragon lady with very accentuated eye makeup, and oh my God. Actually, my shadow self, I think, works for Pixar because it makes everything into a horrifying cartoon. How does your dark side talk to you? Mine has got the most warped sense of humor, and they're always weird cartoons of people doing outrageously ridiculous things that are awful. And if my shadow side gets pushed far enough, I just go right into that Italian Scott, whack it on the head and have it be over with kind of mentality. And that's something that I'm aware of in myself, right? And it's something that I've worked through. And I'm 52 years old at this point. It's very, very, very hard to get me really riled up and furious about much of anything. I can have my feelings I'll get sad before I get insane, just because I know myself really well now, right? I've gone through those youthful periods of losing my crap and saying things to people I couldn't take back and having all this spiritual weight come through because I've got these beings that are around, and I didn't know that I was tapping all this spiritual energy to turn it into the worst knives possible. I didn't know. But guess what? Too late. I'm wrecking friendships. I'm youth. I would never do my late teens and 20s again. What a hard time for all of us in learning who we are. And I'm grateful to my shadow because I was never psychotic. I was never a terrible human being. I was never out to ruin anybody. Yet, boy, I could have a sharp tongue. I really could. And at 52 years old, I'm aware of that. And now I recognize the weight of those words. And I don't need to shred someone to get my point across. I instead the shadow can come forward, and the shadow can present itself in a great vulnerability of the heart. And I can pour out my greatest wounds to someone instead of wounding them to protect my wounds. And that's where I'm at in my life. That is my go-to. I will be the first person to pour my wounds out and explain where I'm coming from. Because that's how my shadow gets to have her voice now. Instead of making bombs in the basement and being creeped out Wednesday Addams and thinking of ways to off people and all, the Italian mafia genes and all those things. I don't have any mafia genes that I'm aware of. Wouldn't surprise me though. So, now the opportunity to let my shadow be vulnerable and say, oh my God, this is how I'm hurting. I am split open by this conversation. I am devastated by those words. What you just said is incomprehensibly painful. Did you mean to say it like that? Or am I just taking that way because I am just run through by what you said to me just now? Oh my God. And then my shadow doesn't have to bear the burden of then becoming the abuser when somebody is abusing me. And I can get myself out of Dodge, and my shadow and I can still be in integrity with one another. And my shadow self and my shiny self have sort of kind of combined as I've gotten older. And I think it's a glorious gift. I think it's a glorious gift to be able to have that self-awareness, to be able to say, shiny self, you freaking bug, dude, shut up. And shadow self, you are so self-absorbed and creepy. Nobody likes you. To be honest, nobody likes the extremes of either of you, okay? So how about you both quit playing your role so hard, shiny self and shadow self? And how about if we just make friends? And how about if we just talk? And shadow, how about if you come forward with your pain instead of creating pain? And shiny, how about if you just let yourself be quiet instead of having to just entertain everybody all the time? And let's meet in the middle, gang. And that's more where I've gotten at 52. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think some heinous thoughts sometimes. Oh my God, if we could go to hell on thoughts alone, I would have a penthouse, I swear to God. However, it is a human response when we see other humans suffering and we see other broken human beings laughing at their suffering or chiding at their suffering or not diving in to save them. It is an incredibly human response to want to protect that person or to stop that other person from chiding or continuing to hurt another. And that mammalian impulse to stop that response comes from the chimpanzee brain. I'm going to whack you on the head with a rock and shut your ass up. Yet this is why we have a prefrontal cortex and a limbic system, and this is why we grow spiritually, is to be able to intercede in a situation like that not only compromises us and how we feel later, because let's face it, if you let your shadow self go on a bender and just rip everybody apart, it's like waking up the next day after drinking too much Jack Daniels and realizing all your clothes are left in the parking lot and you're naked on a park bench. You're like, what the hell did I do? And it's what I call a rage hangover, And if you let yourself go to that place of rage, you are hungover wondering, who did you alienate? Who did you hurt? You're trying to run around and make apologies and nobody wants to talk to you anymore. You can have a rage hangover if you let that dark or shadow self if you oppress that shadow self and it blows up. That's what happens. So this is what I would tell everybody is if we can come into that place with the shadow, accept it, listen to it. You're not a freak if you have freaky thoughts. If you're acting on those thoughts, I highly, highly suggest that you seek very qualified professional help. And please tell a friend. If you're having the shadow thoughts that are having you do terrible things to children or terrible things to yourself or terrible things to animals, or you're becoming a victimizer, there is help for that. And oftentimes folks who go to that extreme in their shadow selves have been horribly abused and have had no one to talk to. And there is help you can get if you find yourself going down those roads. So please seek that help. Please seek that help. Your shadow is acting out, asking for help. And get some help for that before it turns into a situation that you can't undo. And you spend a life that you don't want to spend with a lot of other people who basically live in their shadow self 24/7 in little bitty cells. So there's ways we can navigate the complexity of who we are, gang. And I hope with me sharing some of my more dark times or how I've dealt with more dark times or my bottom of the barrel times, and I just kind of scratched the surface of it. Yet I really hope that it allows you to feel more human, And it allows you to feel like, geez, just because I have these terrible thoughts doesn't mean I'm a terrible person. And it allows you to understand that all of us can be pushed into thinking some pretty wicked stuff in a very wicked scenario. And it doesn't mean you're broken. We get broken when we start ignoring all that stuff and pretending like it's fake and, oh, no, I didn't think that. No. And I'm not suggesting you need to go tell everybody every dark thought you have. Probably not the best friend maker, okay? However, let your shadow self talk to you in terms of its pain first. And let it spill its guts. And let it spill its guts to the people that are important to you. And you will get so much love because guess what? Here's the big jazz hands ending to this. Your shadow self just wants to be acknowledged and loved and told that it's not a freak and a martyr and an idiot and locked away just because its job is to process complex mammalian human emotional stuff in a way that isn't always sociologically very pretty, privately. So just love on it. Love yourself. Love the complexity of yourself. Love your shiny self too. I love you as a complex being because that's what we are. None of us are perfect. None of us are one-dimensional. None of us are flat on the pancake. And sometimes sharing your rough journey within reason. I mean, we don't want to barf every single hangnail we have up on social media every single day. Yet within reason, sharing your journey that's been difficult with people allows them to share their journey. And then their shadow gets a voice too. And then we all realize we're not all crazy for simply being human. I love you, humans. You go love on yourselves, okay? And I will see you next podcast.